from Red Gum Technologies, and we're going to be talking about creating a product out of your knowledge, or thin air, some people would say. Welcome to the call, Robin.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a bit about, Robin Vesey and Red Gum. What do you guys do?
So Redgum's been around for about 25 years. We've been designing and developing software for people. These days we help uh, industry experts, people with a deep domain knowledge in a subject,
Yep.
commercialise that intellectual property, work out how to capture their IP, put it into a software platform, and put that into the cloud so that they can address a much wider market base.
Yeah, right.
Manually.
So really this idea of capturing intellectual property or knowledge and converting it into a scalable product is what you guys are all about.
Yep.
So there seems to be, obviously, this whole COVID thing that has occurred has sort of guided us down this path of using online communication more and more. And I think what it's done is it's almost like a tipping point, isn't it, where people are now starting to almost prefer remote communication over face-to-face, even though they like face-to-face, purely from a logistics point of view.
Yes, it really did accelerate things by about 10 years in terms of people's expectation and people's willingness to adopt things. It would have taken a lot longer for people to get to here otherwise.
So tell me a bit about how are you seeing that play out in the marketplace?
The early stages of it. So there's sort of people now see that it's required and the acceptance is there. And now we're going through people kicking the tires to see what's possible. And we're starting to see those things flow through. But yeah, it's still at that formative stage. Plus, I think this year everybody was just needing a holiday more than diving into more work.
Yeah, fair enough. I think, because we've been helping people grow their businesses for nearly 20 years, and it's fascinating to watch that the principles of business don't change, but the terrain that we apply it to changes. And I was in technology before I started this in the 90s, when the big tech boom occurred and the bubble popped and all those lovely terms.
We were there for that.
I think what I found though is that technology goes through this pendulum swing. We were just talking about this before the call, where something comes out, it's awesome, everyone jumps into it, and then it has a ramification, and it's like okay, now everyone's turned into zombies walking around the street staring at their phone all day, so no one talks to each other anymore. And then a correction occurs where we say, hang on, we're actually human, and this is meant to give us a better lifestyle. It's not meant to take away from our lifestyle. How did you see that playing out when you help people digitize their knowledge?
The main thing that plays out is the question around what should the business model be and what should the revenue stream be for the platform. So every platform delivers a value of some description. And so how do you charge for it? Who do you charge for it? Can make all the difference. And a lot of that problem that you talked about, where everybody's standing looking at their screen the whole day, that's come about because the current generation of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are all driven by advertisers, and so they need to capture your attention. So they've built in an addiction cycle to get you to do that. The next generation of stuff that I design, like advertising, is pretty much, if we can't work out any other business model, we'll fall back to advertising. But there's usually better ones out there that have better outcomes for the actual user. And so that's what I look for first.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. There was a tenet that the internet, if you're on the internet, you're either buying a product or you are the product.
Yes.
And everyone who goes onto the free services, they are unconsciously selling their attention to the advertiser. And even though they're being dopamine hitted up and all that sort of stuff, the truth of the matter is their attention's being sold.
Yes.
And so we don't realise that we don't think we're zombies walking around staring at this screen all day, but we're not actually gleaning information. What we're doing is
you've actually signed a EULA when you first logged on There
Yeah.
was a legal thing that nobody's ever read that said, I give away everything.
Yeah.
And I agreed to give away everything in exchange for getting onto this platform. And that's how they make their money, and they can't afford to build a platform without it. I mean, Twitter's about to face that in its next generation. But yeah, so that is one of the key things is, if you don't get the flow of money right, you don't get to continue building your platform after its first release.
So when you're looking at someone who has an idea, so people have come to our business and they go, we've got some ideas that we want to actually systemize, turn into a process, turn into an app, or turn into a members portal or whatever it might be. How do you assess whether that's going to be successful or not? What do you look for?
So there's a couple of things. I look for, can it be automated? So is there enough knowledge there, and can you translate that knowledge into screens and processes and data that we can manipulate? Some things, yes. There's others that can't. But for the most part, you can. And so sort of validate that core value can actually be delivered to a customer. Then there's who's going to pay for it, is the next big question, and how's it going to pay for it? So advertising is sort of a third party is going to pay for it model. If you're doing direct to consumer stuff, then ideally the consumer is paying for it, because there's a direct feedback loop between the developer or the product designer and the customer. And so you're building for the customer's value. In a lot of cases, you're targeting the customer is the company that has the staff, and the staff are the users. And so there's one removed. And so, and a lot of what we're seeing now is the new generation is sort of growing on top of the social platforms structure. We're having business applications that aren't just one company siloed. They're actually bringing multiple companies together or multiple parties together to solve a particular issue that is supply chain, or it is legal. One we're building at the moment is legal construction. So every participant in building a bridge, all of the contractors, all of the concreters, everything that goes into building a bridge, all are on the one platform, all have the one project secured off to the bits they're allowed to see, but but there's one model that they all contribute to. And that's a real difference from previous generations of products that have come through, where everybody had their own view and it was a bit disjointed.
So what I'm hearing is three things. The first thing is the intellectual property that you have something that can be consumed through a channel? So is it systemable? Second thing was who's paying? And I think that sort of becomes the primary part of the business model. Can we commercialize this? Like, is it going to, like, I always look at people in business, and when they spend money, I say it has to do one of three things. It has to make you money, save you money, or save you time. And I think the same thing with this monetization is who's going to pay, right? So the person who's going to pay is the person that makes money for, saves money for, or saves time for. And then the last thing you said is that it's not just about intellectual property, it's also about this collaboration where we've got different stakeholders, and this technology can now bring these stakeholders into one common platform.
Yeah, correct. And we're removing the main barrier, which is the main barriers of distance and time, where, in the real world, you have to drive somewhere and see somebody, and it takes a long time for things to happen. Whereas computers, it happens nearly instantly, and you can do it from anywhere. And so if you remove those two constraints, what's possible with the software? And that's the bit I enjoy thinking through.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting comment, because I know that people are all zoomed out, right? That's the new thing, Zoom. And I think my favorite quote was that Zoom is not a communication tool, it's a travel replacement.
Yes.
And so when people say I'm zoomed out, you go, well, that's fine. Jump on an aeroplane to Sydney. So you'll have to get up at 5 a.m. to go from Melbourne to Sydney to a 1 hour meeting that'll be around lunchtime, and then jump back on that aeroplane and be home by 8 p.m. at night. So what takes 13 or 14 hours Could
and
take 1 hour.
it costs you $800 today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the contrast, right? So then you
yeah,
say, well, am I really that zoomed out, or do I want to invest my 13 hours and my $800?
yeah.
So it's a value proposition. So I think
Yes.
the pushback is the pendulum swings back, and people go, oh, we want to get back to face, and I've had this interesting dilemma where people go, oh, I'd love to catch up for a meeting, and
Yeah.
then you book a time, and then it's not convenient, and they go, oh, can we just Zoom then? And it's like, you're the one that wants to meet face to face. So we sort of
Yeah.
jest about it, but I think what happens is technology comes in, and this is the
Yeah.
pendulum. People use it, and then they get sick of it, and then it goes out, and then they go, hang on, there's a place for it in our world, and it's not a replacement, it's an addition, an augmentation, right?
Yeah, people. It does take a while for things to settle in and people to get used to a new way of doing things,
Yeah,
and that's and a lot of that. COVID was very focused. Like the lockdowns created a very high pressure incubator for that.
yeah. And
Um,
my favorite part about business is the world changes around us, and
yeah,
what forces is innovation, and the people who embrace it. It's still
yeah, correct.
Yeah, it's still hit and miss, right? You're not going to get it every
Yeah,
single time, but if you get it right, like at the time when COVID hit, I wish I had Zoom shares, right? Now I'd be sort of divesting of them as quickly as possible, right? So it's a timing thing, and
it is. It is, and I think these days, like a lot of businesses, like the cycle for a business is getting shorter
yeah,
for a specific business model of a specific product. That
yeah,
that life cycle is now getting shorter, where products are becoming obsolete quicker, replacements are coming out. It's getting like that cycle's getting a lot faster, and so you know in Australia, we still have this mentality. I'm part of Australian Turnaround Transformation Association. We talk about this a lot, where there's that mentality of if it isn't broke, don't fix it. But you need that these days, you know, back in the 1980s, that was fine because you had 10 years to work out what the new thing would be. Whereas now you've got half a year, um, unless you actually caught it early enough and were developing the new thing while the previous one was still in flight.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so it's
Okay, so really, the message I'm getting is that the platforms exist now to actually to productize knowledge.
yep,
They've evolved over time because there's been online learning for many years. People are starting to realize that it's actually, ironically, more effective than face-to-face learning. Now, I remember watching an
yep,
interesting YouTube video about 3 or 4 years ago about this tutor, and he was teaching his nephews overseas physics, and they'd have
yep.
a catch up every week, and he'd do a tutorial, and then he was going away for a month hiking in the middle of nowhere, and he said, I'm going to pre-record the next 4 sessions for you. And when he came back, to his dismay, his nephew said, we preferred the recordings to the live sessions. He was puzzled, and he said, why is that? And he goes, because we can replay them, we can watch them at our own pace. Whereas
Mm.
when it's live, I feel intimidated, stopping you in flow and asking questions. And I would rather spend our time together looking at the work we've done and correcting it rather than just absorbing data. And that to me is
And
exciting, right? Because it's changed the
that's,
way that we communicate.
that's exactly what technology should be used for.
Yeah,
Everybody's scared that it's going to replace people,
yeah,
and it's done properly. It's not supposed to replace people. It's supposed to uplift people
mm,
and allow them to provide the highest value contribution um, that they can, not sit there and do all the drudge work.
yeah,
Um, that should be a computer's job. Anything you don't like doing, that's the computer's job. Um, Humans. So when I design a system, I design for the human to be in there, not to try and cut them out, because a lot of business cases are made by how much headcount we can remove, and I strongly believe that's a short term mentality
mm,
because the automation is fantastic for as far as you can see forward from today,
yeah,
right? But over time, that's going to catch up with you, and you'll become obsolete much faster than if you had people in there that can still see what the next horizon is and be telling the developers what they should be automating for. And so for me, you've got to be uplifting people, not replacing them.
Yeah, and I think what you talk about is like the difference between a scarcity and abundance mindset is the way
Yeah,
I would refer to that. And I think a lot of people are fearful of loss. So if
yeah,
you get a computer to do my job, then what? I'm out of a job. And
yeah,
I think the truth of the matter is that humans have always been progressive and aspirational. It's programmed into our DNA. And when we fight that by saying don't change things because we like the status quo,
yeah,
um, we're almost fighting our very nature, which is to evolve.
yeah,
Evolution to me doesn't mean dumping things that are important. It means doing more productive things in the time that we have on the planet. So,
yeah,
so what you talk about is super interesting to me because I think every industry evolves, and,
mm,
and some of them evolve quickly because of technology, and others just evolve sideways, and some of them die. Right?
yes,
But as humans, we're far from finished in terms of having the perfect world that we live in. We're so far away from it; it's not funny,
no,
and all the knowledge and intellectual property that could be systemized to free up the minds to think about how to solve other problems.
yeah,
So I think there's a big sort of opportunity in front of us, but there is a lot of pushback from status quo, comfort zone, human nature. How do you deal with that? So you're talking about transition, you're talking about change management to a large degree, right?
yes,
Hey, we can do it better, we can do it online, we can do it on your phone, and we can be super effective. But
yeah.
then human nature is to fight that and say, hang on a second, whose job are you stealing here? How do you mitigate those sort of things?
So I suppose there was the biggest one of that is we were working for a union about 10, 15 years ago,
Mm.
and they hadn't changed since the 1930s. They were still using punch cards that you see in libraries. Um, and so, we were taking all of this away from them. And we brought in specialists to help with that transition.
Mm.
And I sat there in all those meetings with all the people that I was going to inflict this change on. And software developers are great at
Yeah.
inflicting change on others, but try and get them to change is. I got a team of 15, and trying to get them to change is painful.
Mm.
But it's for everybody. Everybody loves their own comfort zone, but they can see how others can be improved, and
Yeah.
they want to like genuinely want to do the right thing for those other people. But yes, so we actually find people that will help them through that change process, and we don't have those skills like our team
Mm.
particularly, and so that's actually part of what I've done now that I've sort of moved myself out of the daily operations of Redgum.
Yeah.
I've started a new group called Transform Studios, and it's the bigger picture of not just let's get the technology right, but let's get the entire process
Mm.
of discovering what should be there, developing the business, developing the technology, branding, marketing, sales, implementation, change management. Get Let's bring all the specialists together
Yeah.
that can help a transformation happen properly.
Right. So not just about the technology, not about getting your knowledge into product, but actually making sure that it actually is a viable business.
Yes, yes, because too many of our clients, we've delivered them fantastic software, and it's just sat on the shelf
Mm.
because they didn't have the right marketing, they didn't have the right sales, or each one had a different particular problem that blocked them in the market from getting their funding.
Yep.
It's another big one, and so they're sitting on the shelf, still perfectly viable products, but you know so that's why I created this Transform Studios, was to bring all the other skill sets that I don't have to bear on the problem.
Fantastic. So I suppose as we sort of talk about this, there's people out there who would be listening to this and saying, I'm not sure if it's something that would work for my IP or for my business.
Yep.
What are the key elements that you would sort of be look? So obviously the first one was, is the is the knowledge something that can be recorded and disseminated?
Something can be codified, yeah.
Yeah.
So good indicators are that a lot of people can imagine it as an app and say, these are the types of screens, and they usually look at the 20%, and the rest of it's all the other stuff like taking payments and that sort of stuff. But if they can imagine those screens, then there's a good chance if they, they've seen apps that are kind of like it, but for some other industry.
Yeah.
That's a good indicator. The key one that we usually have is they have a big magic spreadsheet that kind of, you can see it almost happen in the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Or they've got lots of checklists and lots of process documentation, and they're doing it all manually, or they, these days hopefully they've got it sort of cobbled together with a bit of Trello and a bit of Google Sheets and a few of these pieces of the puzzle tied together, and they can almost see it happen, but that's never going to scale to 1,000 people using it daily.
So I suppose, and you touched on something there, which is this scale thing, because I might have a brilliant idea, but if I can't find enough people to monetize, because obviously there's an investment, and I'm going to ask you a very broad question here is, what sort of money were you looking at to take someone's knowledge and productize it?
The favourite piece of string. It is, yes. So it can be, depending on the complexity, but a good number for our clients is somewhere between 80 and 120,000 to get it into the market.
Yeah.
Before you've spent that money, you probably want to spend 10 to 20,000 to crystallize the idea, validate it with the market, validate it with your market. So that comes up with the business model, the business plan, revenue stream, and enough of the product validation to say, yes, we're confident to invest that much more money.
Gotcha.
And so that's what I do is take people through that initial proof, to give them the confidence, and to give other investors, or for larger businesses, the sponsors, the confidence that we're heading down the right track and it's worth doing.
So I'm a numbers guy. So what I heard there was about 10K to evaluate an idea, and probably around 200K to roll it out, and then trimmings around that. So any marketing and support related costs, and so then to be viable, you'd have to sort of have $1 million plus market for this idea. Like you'd have to have some level of confidence that there's at least $1 million out there that I can generate from this.
Correct.
To even go down this path.
Yes, for a digital product, it is. Physical product, the integrated to digital product, you're probably talking a fair bit more on the initial investment.
Yeah. When you say physical, what are you referring to?
So there's a lot of devices now that the phone's the biggest device that we've got. It's got all sorts of stuff on board.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other devices, particularly people riding bikes and heavy industrial machinery tracking data and all that sort of stuff. So we've done a lot of work in the medical space, capturing all that data and bringing it back to a computer to be processed, analysed, and presented to humans so that they can make sensible decisions. So those ones. So we've brought a few things through medical trial, and that's well over $1 million to get those things going. But for pure software, business process driven, we're solving business process problems. They're a lot cheaper at the 100 for the software, double that for the marketing, branding, marketing, initial sales effort. To get that proof. Scaling, yes, you'd want over $1 million, but once you've proven traction, you can start. In Australia, the external investors won't really talk to you until you've got traction. So you need to have gone through that initial stuff yourself. In the US, it's different. They'll pay you to prove your idea. But the Australian market's different. So and so we're sort of establishing those connections out into the funding groups now. So,
I just want to touch on this concept just as part of this call is intellectual property and protection of it.
Yes.
A lot of people won't go down this path because they're terrified that you'll steal my idea and copy it and run away with it. What's your view of this?
Okay, so my view of this is, unless you're a software developer, I can't really steal your idea because I don't have the depth of domain knowledge and industry knowledge that I'm going to need in 6 months, 2 years' time When the next problem comes up, I'm going to look at it. It's not my field.
Yeah.
So I can't answer that question. So you know, I've hit that people being scared about that a lot.
Yes.
So a software developer can't take it unless it's generalist business, like a tasking system. But all of those things are done to death now anyway. And so so really, if for our niche, we couldn't rip it off and do it ourselves because we don't have the skill set.
Yeah.
Secondly, I see a good number of systems a week, and I can only build 8 to 10 a year at best. So the chance of going after your particular thing is pretty small.
I'm glad you said that, because like my counselling for people with intellectual property is give it away, because that's not where the money is. It's in the execution.
Correct. And it really is the execution.
And too many people, their idea dies because they don't want to tell anyone about it because they're nervous that someone's going to steal it. And you go, it's just an idea. You go to a venture capitalist and say, I have an idea, and they'll send you out the front door straight away.
Yep.
They want to see track record. They want to see management skill, deployment skill. They want to know that you can actually roll this thing out. They don't care. Yeah.
Well, the main thing any investor wants to know is how much more are you going to make me than I've given you?
Yeah.
And how long is that going to take you?
Quickly, right?
You can answer those two questions. They'll invest in you or not.
Yeah.
And you have to convince them. So we've asked, 100 prospects, and they've all said we're going to take it. They've signed up. They've paid a small deposit. If you can prove that, people will invest. If you can't prove that, particularly in Australia, you're not going to get investment.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of incubators around that help people with their startup ideas. But I think what you're talking about here is much more sort of almost like bread and butter. If you're in a business that has a process or has a communication or has some sort of internal system that transfers knowledge, it might not be a startup. It might be an augmentation to your current business or a cost reduction of the current business.
Yeah, so you can do it to uplift your current staff and your current business.
Yep.
It can be a new product or service line for your business.
Yep.
A lot of the time, a lot of what we see is it's a spin-off from your current business, which is in industry X. And what you've done is solve the problem that everybody else in your industry is trying to solve. And so nobody's going to buy from their competitor because they're scared about having the data. But if you put it into a separate entity that has its own lifespan,
gotcha.
You can make money from helping the rest of your competitors.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love this area because it's an area that can get substantial growth because you're innovating and you're coming in a space that's non-competitive in a lot of cases, not all cases.
Yeah.
And what it does is, from an entrepreneurial point of view, is I believe that if you can add value to a market, that's where you make money.
Exactly.
Unless you can do it substantially better, I think it's about innovating and this whole notion of, we used to be in the industrial age where you got paid to go to work and be on production line. Then we moved into the information age. But now, the irony when people say, I don't know anything about X, Y, Z is pull your phone out of your pocket, type in the question in Google, and you'll have more answers than you could possibly read in a year, in a lifetime. So access to information is now no longer a problem. I think what we're missing now is this whole idea of using the communication channels to improve our effectiveness. And what you've described is perfectly in that space.
Yeah, no, and it really, I described it a few years ago as any gap between a human thinking, I wish this could happen, and it appearing. That gap is where the opportunity is. Technology is going to get to the point where we can, think about something, validate it, and get it out there faster and faster. So that's
I just had a sci-fi moment when you said that, because we can think of when they appear. Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, I don't know about the brain implants. That's sort of, I might be a bit old these days, but yeah.
Well, they do say the brain works on electricity, right? So if we can read those electrical impulses in an intelligent way, there's probably a point in time where we can use our thinking to control electrical devices, right?
Yes. Well, they've already got the basics of that going.
Yeah.
where you can we actually did a project where we put a device on people's heads, and we were trying to control a slot car
Yeah.
and do a slot car race so that people, if they concentrated, the car would go faster around the track. And we could actually read the impulse off the. We could. There was a couple of algorithms that told us whether they were focused or whether they were relaxed,
That's
and
terrifying.
and so the way then COVID hit and we never got to finish the project. But yeah, but what I wanted to do was get them to relax, and that would make the car go faster
Okay.
because it's the
Yeah,
dissonance between the two would make it really hard to
fascinating.
achieve.
I love this stuff. But anyway, look, I'm mindful of time. I really appreciate you joining me today. Obviously, for people who've got some sort of level of knowledge that they want to convert into product,
Yes.
they can Google or they can just jump on Redgum or find you. You know, your name's right there on the screen, Robin. Even these
Yeah,
days.
so robinvesey.com is
Yeah.
the other.
Yeah, I think that's going to be redundant too one day. They're just going to type in Robin Vesey. They'll see you and
Yeah,
they'll go, that's the guy, right? But
yeah. There's not many of the same name, so you'll probably find me. Yeah.
probably. When you type in David Guest, you get David.
Mm.
You get the wrong David Guest. I'm not going to tell you, but people often say, "Hang on, aren't you that guy that's in?" No, anyway. So Google it, you'll find out. Robin, thanks again so much for your time. Really appreciate your input and really appreciate the knowledge that you've shared with us today. So thanks.
Yes, thanks for having me. It was good.